The moment I saw my stepbrother rise from his seat in the third row, I knew something was wrong. He had that look, the one I'd spent 22 years learning to read the way other people read weather. Jaw tight, eyes fixed on me like I'd stolen something from him, which, in his mind, I suppose I had. I was standing at the front of the auditorium in my dress uniform, the chief of police 3 feet to my left, 200 people seated in rows behind the velvet rope. My badge was in a small wooden box on the table in front of me. In 30 seconds, someone was going to pin it to my chest. My stepbrother had other plans. Let me take you back. Because none of this makes sense without the beginning. And the beginning, for me, was a Tuesday in November when I was 6 years old and my mother brought home a man named Warren. Not Warren, from the file of band names. This Warren, my Warren. The one who would spend the next decade rewriting every story about me until I barely recognized myself in any of them. My mother. I'll call her Mom because she was, for a long time, the only person I had. Met him at a church fundraiser. She was 31, recently divorced, working doubles at a diner outside Columbus. She was tired in the way that goes all the way down into the bone. Warren was charming, attentive, employed. He drove a clean truck and he remembered her coffee order, and he was patient with me in that deliberate way that men sometimes are when they're auditioning for something. She married him 14 months later. He had a son from his first marriage, Brendan, 4 years older than me, which meant by the time I was 12 and starting to understand what was happening in our house, he was 16 and had already learned everything Warren had to teach him. The first year was mostly fine, or fine enough that a 6-year-old wouldn't have language for what wasn't. Warren didn't hit, he didn't drink. What he did was quieter and harder to name. He had a way of making you feel like you were always slightly wrong. Wrong temperature in the room, wrong amount of noise, wrong face for the occasion. If I came home with a good grade, he'd ask why I hadn't gotten it sooner. If I made the soccer team, he said recreational leagues were for kids who couldn't commit to anything serious. When I cried, which I did because I was a child, he'd look at my mother with this small, tired expression. This again. My mother would put her hand on my shoulder and steer me toward the stairs. Brendan watched all of this and took notes. By the time I was 10, he developed his own version of it. He was better at it than Warren, actually. Warren was blunt, like a hammer. Brendan was precise. He knew which words left no bruises. He'd tell me my friends had only invited me to things because they felt sorry for me. He'd tell me I was the reason our mother seemed sad all the time. He'd wait until I'd worked up the nerve to show Mom a drawing or a story I'd written, and then he'd appear in the doorway and say something offhand. Is that for school? Or is it just something you made? And the air would go out of the room. I tried telling my mother once. I was 11. I sat at the kitchen table after dinner and I said, as carefully as I could, that Brendan said things that hurt me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Brendan has had a hard time adjusting. You need to be more patient with him. I didn't try again for a long time. What I did instead was get serious about school. I don't know if it was strategy or survival instinct, probably both. I figured out early that grades were the one thing no one could take credit for except me and no one could take away. I ran track. I studied criminal justice not because anyone encouraged it, but because I was 17 years old, sitting in a library trying to avoid going home, and I picked up a book about forensic psychology and couldn't put it down. I wanted to understand people like Warren, people like Brendan. What made someone decide that controlling another person was the same as loving them? When I got accepted to Ohio State, Warren sat at the dinner table and said, Well, don't expect us to bail you out when you realize you've made a mistake. Mom said nothing. I left for Columbus 3 weeks later with 2 duffel bags and $40 in my checking account. I did not look back. College was where I became someone I actually recognized. I won't pretend it was easy. I worked 20 hours a week at an off-campus coffee shop, shared a 2-bedroom apartment with 3 other women, ate a lot of rice and eggs. But I was free in a way I hadn't known I could be, and that freedom felt like oxygen after years of breathing something thinner. I made friends, real ones. I met a woman named Greta in my intro criminology course. She was pre-law, ferociously smart, had a laugh that could clear a room, and she became the first person in my life who treated my opinions like they were worth something. I called her when things got hard. I still do. I graduated in 3 years and 8 months. Magna cum laude. Criminal justice, minor in psychology. I applied to the Columbus Metropolitan Police Academy the same week I handed in my last paper. My mother called when she heard. It was a short conversation. "Warren says that's a dangerous career for a woman," she said. I said thank you for calling and got off the phone. The academy was the hardest 12 months of my life and also, somehow, the most clarifying. There is something about being pushed to the absolute edge of what you can physically do every single day and still being standing at the end. It changes what you believe about yourself. I'd spent my whole childhood being told, in 100 different ways, that I was insufficient. The academy didn't care about any of that. It only cared about what you could do, right now, with what you had. I could do quite a lot, my instructors noticed. One of them, a retired sergeant named Paulson, pulled me aside in month 4 and told me I had the kind of focus he didn't see often. "Don't waste it," he said. It was 10 words. I've thought about them probably 10,000 times since. By the time graduation approached, I had the second highest score in my cohort. I'd been assigned to a district I'd requested, the one that covered the neighborhood where I'd grown up. I wanted to serve there. I knew those streets. I knew what it looked like when a family was struggling behind a closed door. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday morning in March, held at the main auditorium of the city's public safety headquarters, a room with high ceilings and folding chairs and a flag at the front that I had looked at so many times during training that I could describe every fold. I invited my mother. I almost didn't, but I still thought, then, that maybe something like this could be the thing that shifted her. That watching me stand at the front of a room and receive a badge from the chief of police might be the moment she finally saw me clearly. She said she would come. She said Warren and Brendan would come too. I should have known better. The morning of graduation, I woke up at 5 a.m. I pressed my uniform. I polished my shoes until I could see myself in them. Greta came over and sat on my bed and talked to me while I got ready. About nothing in particular, the way good friends do when they know you're nervous and don't want to make it worse by naming it. "You look like someone people will believe in," she said when I was done. I drove to the venue alone. The auditorium filled up over the following hour. 200 seats, most of them taken. Families with cameras, proud fathers in American flag pins, a cluster of city council members in the 3rd row, and Chief Harrington, solid, silver-haired, the kind of man who had spent 30 years on the force and still somehow seemed like he was choosing it fresh every morning, standing near the podium, talking to the deputy commissioner. My cohort lined up backstage in alphabetical order. I was near the middle. My last name, Duvain, put me between a guy named Delaney and a woman named Espinoza who I'd eaten lunch with almost every day for a year. We were all very still, all very aware that after this, it was real. The ceremony started. Names were called. Each of us walked to the front, shook hands with Chief Harrington, received our badge, turned to face the room. When my name was called, I walked out from the wings, and the lights were very bright and the room sounded like something pressed close against my ears. Not loud exactly, but dense. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. I reached the front. Chief Harrington extended his hand and I shook it. The deputy commissioner opened the wooden box. The badge was inside and it caught the light, and for a moment I forgot to breathe because I had wanted this for so long and it was actually happening. And then I heard the chair scrape. I knew the sound of that particular kind of movement. Purposeful, not accidental. I looked up. Brendan was standing in the 3rd row. He was holding something. I couldn't tell what it was at first. My vision was narrowing the way it does under stress, peripheral edges going soft. Then I saw it was a folder. Thick. Manila. He held it up over his head like a sign. "She doesn't deserve to be here," he said. His voice carried. The room went quiet in an instant, the way rooms do when something wrong enters them. "She stole from our family. She took money from our father when he was sick, and she never paid it back. Chief Harrington took one step forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. There was a quality to his stillness that was somehow louder than anything else in the room. The stillness of someone who has handled 200 situations worse than this one and is not remotely impressed. "Sir," he said, "you will sit down." Brendan didn't sit down. He kept going. Something about documents, something about a loan, something about how I had manipulated my way through the academy. The words were coming fast now, tripping over each other, and I could see from where I was standing that his hands were shaking, that he was scared, not brave, that this was desperation, not conviction. I stood very still. I had made a decision sometime in the previous 5 seconds that I was not going to move. I was not going to cry or shout or give him anything he could use. I was going to stand exactly where I was in this uniform, in this room, and I was going to let him finish. 2 officers from the building's security detail were already moving up the aisle. Chief Harrington turned to me, looked at me for a moment. Then he picked up the badge from the wooden box and held it out. "Officer Duvain," he said, "congratulations." The room started applauding before the badge was even pinned. Not a polite applause, the kind that builds from a few people and then everyone joins because they understand what it means. I heard Greta somewhere to my left, louder than everyone else. Brendan was escorted out. He was not gentle about it. I did not look at him. I pinned the badge to my chest with steady hands. My mother sat in the 7th row and did not clap. She was looking at the floor. What I didn't know yet was that Brendan had been building this for months. The folder he was waving contained a collection of documents that were, in some cases, real, and in others, altered just enough to tell a different story. Warren had co-signed a student loan for me when I was 19. This was true. It was also true that I had paid it off, on time, every month, for 4 years, and that the account had been closed with a 0 balance since I was 23. Brendan had obtained a copy of the original loan agreement. He had not obtained, or had deliberately withheld, any record of the payments. He had also, I would later learn, made calls to people in my neighborhood, to a former landlord of mine, to the mother of a childhood friend, asking questions designed to plant seeds. Did she ever borrow money from you? Did she ever seem unstable to you? Do you remember anything concerning about her behavior? He was careful about it, careful enough that no one quite understood what he was doing until later. But the calls happened. His lawyer, this detail will matter, submitted a formal complaint to the police department 2 days before graduation. The complaint alleged financial misconduct and raised questions about my fitness for the role. Chief Harrington had seen it, had reviewed it the morning of the ceremony, had spoken with the deputy commissioner and the department's legal counsel, and had made a decision, before he ever walked into that auditorium, that a 2-page complaint composed entirely of allegations without supporting documentation was not going to change a damn thing. He told me all of this a week later in his office, with a cup of coffee in front of each of us and the door closed. "I've been doing this for 30 years, he said. "I know the difference between someone who did something wrong and someone whose family decided they needed to be wrong." I had to look out the window for a moment before I could answer him. The formal investigation was opened because procedure required it. Lasted 11 days. The loan repayment records were verified, the account closure confirmed, the calls Brendan had made traced back to him through phone records. The complaint was dismissed without finding. Brendan's attorney filed a civil suit 2 weeks after that. I hired a lawyer, a woman I found through the police union's legal assistance program, mid-40s. No nonsense. The kind of person who reads a stack of documents the way other people read the morning news. Her name was Miss Calhoun. She called me on a Wednesday afternoon and said, "I've been through everything. He has nothing." She said it with the flatness of someone stating a fact about the weather. The civil case was dismissed at the pre-trial motion stage. The judge, a man in his 60s with the expression of someone who had seen every version of this particular story, granted summary judgment in my favor. He noted in his ruling that the plaintiff had failed to produce a single document substantiating the claims and that the preponderance of evidence established repayment in full. Brendan's lawyer later faced a state bar complaint for filing a claim the review board determined had no reasonable basis in fact or law. The outcome of that proceeding took another 8 months, but the result was a formal censure. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard. Just tired in a way that was somehow lighter than the tiredness I'd carried before. My mother called me on a Sunday in May. I almost didn't answer. I was sitting on the small back patio of my apartment with a cup of coffee and a novel I'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks. And it was warm and quiet, and I had learned, slowly, that quiet was something I deserved and not something I had to earn. But I answered. She was crying before she finished saying my name. What she told me over the next 40 minutes was not a surprise and also somehow still managed to land like a stone. Warren had been telling her for years that I had a tendency toward dishonesty, that the version of events I presented was always self-serving, that she should be careful about believing me too readily because I had a gift for making myself look like the victim. He said this so consistently for so long that she had stopped being able to hear me through it. She had known on some level that Brendan was making the calls before graduation. She had not warned me. She told me she was sorry. I listened to her say it several times. I believed her. I also understood, in a way that was not angry but simply true, that sorry did not undo 22 years of someone choosing to look away. That love is not only an emotion, it is also a series of choices made in real time, and she had made hers, again and again, in the direction of a man who had never deserved them. I told her I needed time. She said she understood. I think she did. She and Warren separated that fall. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in the town where her sister lived. She's been seeing a therapist. We talk sometimes. It is careful and slow, and I do not know yet what it will become. But it is something. I've decided that something is worth leaving a door open for. I have been on the force for almost 2 years now. I work out of the district I requested. Most days it is ordinary work, calls and reports, and the particular exhaustion of paperwork. Some days it is more than that. A family in a house with a closed door. A kid who looks at me the way I used to look at doors, calculating the distance. I know that look. I know what it means. 8 months ago, I started a mentorship program through the district called Clear Path. It's for teenagers who've been flagged as at risk. Most of them have some kind of family instability in the background, the way I did. We meet twice a week in the community room at the local library. We talk about things nobody talked to me about when I was that age: boundaries, choices, what it actually looks like to build a life that belongs to you. One of my kids, a 16-year-old named Tobias, told me a few weeks ago that nobody had ever asked him what he wanted to be before. Not what job, not what college, what he wanted to be as a person. I told him I hadn't been asked that either. Not until I started asking myself. He thought about it for a long time. Then he said he wanted to be someone who told the truth even when it cost something. I wrote that down when I got home. I still have it on a sticky note on my refrigerator. I think about the auditorium sometimes, the scrape of Brendan's chair, Chief Harrington's voice, quiet, absolute, immovable, the badge in the wooden box catching the light. I think about what it cost me to stay standing. And I think about the fact that I did stay standing and that nobody can take that from me and that the whole room saw it. I used to believe that surviving something was the point, that if you made it through, that was enough. That was the victory. I don't think that anymore. Surviving is just the beginning. What you build after it, what you decide to do with the fact of having made it through. That's the actual story. I'm still writing mine, and for the first time in my life, I'm the only one holding the pen. I've thought a lot about why Brendan did what he did. Not in the way I used to. Not with the kind of thinking that circles back on itself and goes nowhere. But clearly, the way you can finally see something once you've gotten far enough away from it. He believed, genuinely, that I was supposed to stay small. That was the world he'd been taught. Warren built it, and Brendan inherited it, and for a long time it worked. Because I was a kid, and I didn't have the language for what was happening, and the one person who should have protected me had decided that keeping the peace was the same as keeping us safe. It wasn't. It never is. What I understand now is that people who need to control others are almost always afraid of something. Warren was afraid of being ordinary. Brendan was afraid of being left behind. And fear, when it has no honest outlet, becomes cruelty. It disguises itself as authority, as correction, as concern. It sounds like you're not good enough when what it actually means is, I'm terrified you are. I spent years absorbing that fear as if it were fact. That's the thing nobody warns you about. You don't choose to believe it. It just accumulates the way dust does, quietly, until one day you look around and you can't see clearly anymore. What changed me was not a single moment. It was a series of small, deliberate choices. To study when I was exhausted, to show up when I wanted to disappear, to ask myself what I actually wanted instead of what I'd been told I should want. None of it was dramatic. Most of it was lonely. But each choice was a vote for a version of myself that hadn't existed yet, and eventually that version started to become real. The day Brendan stood up in that auditorium, I think part of him expected me to fall apart, to become the girl from the kitchen table again, the one who cried and was told to be patient. Instead, I stood still, not because I wasn't afraid. I was, in the way your body responds before your mind catches up, but because I had spent years learning that fear is not the same as weakness, and that you can be terrified and still not move. Chief Harrington saw that. I don't know if he would describe it that way, but I think what he responded to, in that room, was not just the wrongness of what Brendan was doing. It was the rightness of someone refusing to be diminished by it. That's what I want the kids in Clear Path to understand. Not that life is fair, because it isn't. Not that people who hurt you will always face consequences, because they don't always, not on any timeline that feels satisfying. But that the way you carry yourself in the hardest moment is something no one can manufacture for you and no one can take from you. It belongs entirely to you. Greta told me once, not long after graduation, that watching me stand at that podium while Brendan was escorted out was the moment she understood what I was made of. I told her I hadn't known either until then. That's the truth of it. You don't know what you're made of until something tries to unmake you. And then you find out. I'm still finding out. Every shift, every Tuesday in the library with Tobias and the others, every phone call with my mother where we're careful and slow and trying. None of it is resolved the way stories are supposed to resolve. But it's real and it's mine, and I built it. Not in spite of everything that happened, but through it. That's not a small thing. That's everything.